The distant howl of a wolf pierced through the stillness of the Montana night as Josephine Summers stood in the doorway of her small cabin, clutching her father's old rifle. The year was 1876, and at 22 years old, she had already buried both her parents and taken over the struggling cattle ranch they had built from nothing. Her chestnut hair whipped around her face as she scanned the horizon, the first pink light of dawn revealing a slumped figure on horseback approaching her property. Josephine narrowed her eyes, raising the rifle cautiously. Strangers in these parts were rarely good news, especially with the tensions between cattle ranchers and the railroad companies growing more violent by the day. The rider swayed precariously in the saddle, and as the horse drew closer, Josephine could see that the man was barely conscious. "Stop right there," she called out, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The horse, a magnificent palomino, continued forward of its own accord, its rider making no move to control it. When they were about 20 yards from the cabin, the man slipped sideways and fell heavily to the ground. The horse stopped, nickering nervously beside its fallen master. Josephine hesitated only a moment before rushing forward, rifle still in hand. The man lay face down in the dirt, his breathing shallow. She rolled him over carefully, revealing a face streaked with blood and dirt. He was young, perhaps 25, with several days' worth of stubble on his jaw and dark blonde hair matted with blood. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, though she didn't recognize him from any of the neighboring ranches. "Can you hear me?" she asked, touching his shoulder. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky. "Water," he croaked before falling unconscious again. Josephine glanced around. She couldn't leave him out in the open with the sun rising and predators about. Making a quick decision, she hooked her arms under his and began the arduous task of dragging him toward her cabin. The man was tall and solid with muscle, making the short distance feel like miles. By the time she got him to the porch, sweat drenched her blouse and her arms trembled with exertion. "You've picked the wrong place to die, cowboy," she muttered, struggling to haul him up the 3 wooden steps and through the doorway. Inside, she managed to get him onto the small bed in the corner of the main room. She caught her breath, then fetched water from the barrel outside. The palomino had followed them to the cabin, and she quickly tied it to the hitching post before returning to her unexpected guest. The man's face was pale beneath his tan, and his forehead burned with fever. Josephine cut away his bloodied shirt, revealing a gunshot wound in his left side. The bullet had gone straight through, missing any vital organs from what she could tell, but infection had clearly set in. "Looks like someone wanted you dead, mister," she said, though he couldn't hear her. She cleaned the wound as best she could, applying a poultice of herbs her Cheyenne friend had taught her to make. Once she had bandaged him up, she turned her attention to the gash on his head, washing away the dried blood and applying a clean bandage. For 3 days, the cowboy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering incoherent phrases that hinted at trouble. Josephine caught fragments about Blackwater Gang and stolen cattle, but nothing that gave her a clear picture of what had happened to him. She tended to him faithfully, all while maintaining her daily chores around the ranch. It wasn't easy for a woman alone, but she'd grown accustomed to hard work since her father's passing 2 years earlier. On the 4th morning, Josephine was stirring a pot of chicken soup when she heard movement from the bed. She turned to find the cowboy attempting to sit up, his face contorted with pain. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said, moving to his side and gently pressing him back down. "You'll open your wounds again." His blue eyes focused on her face, clearer than they had been since his arrival. "Where am I? Who are you?" "You're at the Summers Ranch, about 15 miles east of Copper Creek. I'm Josephine Summers, and you are," he swallowed, his throat working painfully. Adam Russell." "Well, Mr. Russell, you've been shot and beaten half to death. You rode onto my property 4 days ago and promptly fell off your horse." Adam closed his eyes briefly. "The Blackwater Gang," he said hoarsely. "They ambushed me." I was transporting money for the railroad payroll. The railroad, Josephine's voice cooled noticeably. You work for them, not exactly. I'm a hired gun, he broke off in a fit of coughing. Josephine's lips thinned. The railroad companies had been forcing small ranchers like her off their land all across the territory. But whatever her feelings about his employers, the man was in no condition to defend himself. She helped him drink some water, then returned to the stove. You need to eat something, she said, ladling soup into a wooden bowl. When she returned to his side, Adam tried to take the bowl, but his hands shook so badly that the soup sloshed over the edges. Let me, Josephine said, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed. She held a spoonful of soup to his lips, and after a moment of hesitation, he accepted it. The simple broth with chunks of chicken and vegetables was the first real food he'd had in days. As she continued to feed him, spoonful by spoonful, Josephine noticed the fine lines around his eyes relax, and some color returned to his face. Why are you helping me? He asked after several minutes of silence. Most folks would have left a railroad man to die. Josephine considered the question. My father taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by who they work for, but by what they do when no one's watching. Besides, she added with a small smile, I couldn't very well leave you out there for the wolves and vultures. Bad for business having dead bodies on the property. A ghost of a smile crossed Adam's lips. I'm obliged to you, Miss Summers. Not many would take in a stranger like this. Don't thank me yet. You've still got a fever and those wounds need time to heal. She continued feeding him until the bowl was empty and his eyelids began to droop with exhaustion. As she took the bowl away, she noticed that his hands had stopped shaking quite so violently. Rest now, she said. We'll talk more when you're stronger. The next few days fell into a pattern. Josephine would tend to her chores in the early morning, feeding the chickens, milking her cow, and checking on the small herd of cattle that remained after selling most of her father's stock. Then she would return to the cabin to check on Adam, changing his bandages and preparing meals. 3 times a day she would feed him soup, each time noticing that his hands grew steadier. On the 7th day, Adam was able to sit up on his own, and the fever had broken completely. Josephine found him looking out the window when she returned from her morning chores. Your horse is doing fine, she said, setting down a basket of eggs. He's a beautiful animal, Sundance, Adam said. His name is Sundance. He saved my life more times than I can count. Josephine moved to the stove, stoking the fire. Looks like he did it again. No, Adam said quietly. That was you. Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them that made Josephine's heart beat a little faster. She looked away first, busying herself with breakfast preparations. Can you tell me what happened? She asked. How you ended up half dead on my doorstep? Adam shifted, wincing slightly at the pain in his side. I was escorting a payroll shipment from Billings to the railroad camp near Copper Creek. The Blackwater Gang must have gotten word of it. They ambushed us about 20 miles north of here, killed the 2 men with me, and took the money. I managed to shoot one of them before they got me. And they left you alive. They thought I was dead. I played possum until they rode off, then managed to get on Sundance. I wasn't thinking clearly after that, just told him to run, and he did. Adam ran a hand through his hair, which Josephine had washed the day before. I don't remember much after that until waking up here. You're lucky to be alive, Josephine said, bringing him a plate of eggs and a biscuit. Your wound was badly infected. This time he was able to take the plate himself, though his hands still trembled slightly. I owe you a debt I can't repay. Nonsense, Josephine replied. Just get well enough to ride out of here. I've got a ranch to run, and nursing invalid cowboys isn't part of my regular chores. Despite her words, there was no real bite to them. In truth, she had grown accustomed to having someone else in the cabin. The loneliness of ranch life had been wearing on her more than she cared to admit. As the days passed, Adam grew stronger. By the end of the 2nd week, he was able to move around the cabin, and by the 3rd week, he ventured outside to sit on the porch. Josephine found herself enjoying his company, despite her initial reservations about his connection to the railroad. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Adam broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "I should be able to ride in a few days," he said. "I need to report what happened to the railroad office in Copper Creek." Josephine nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang in her chest. "Yes, I expect you're well enough for that now. The Blackwater Gang is still out there," he continued. "They might come looking for me if they hear I survived." "Are you saying I'm in danger?" Josephine asked sharply. "It's possible." "They're not known for leaving loose ends." Adam looked at her directly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, but I also don't like the idea of leaving you here alone. I've been alone for 2 years, Mr. Russell. I can handle myself." "I don't doubt that," he said with a small smile. "But even the strongest person can be overwhelmed by numbers. The Blackwater Gang usually rides with 6 or 7 men." Josephine considered his words. She knew he was right. If such men came to her ranch with ill intent, her rifle and determination might not be enough. "What do you suggest?" she asked finally. "Come with me to Copper Creek, at least until I can arrange for some men to come back and make sure the gang isn't hanging around." She laughed incredulously. "And leave my ranch unattended. Everything I own is here." "Just for a few days," Adam pressed. "The railroad will compensate you for your help. I'll make sure of it." Josephine stood up, annoyed. "I don't want railroad money. What I want is to be left in peace to run my ranch without being pushed off my land or shot at by outlaws. Neither of which was a problem until you showed up." She stormed inside, letting the door slam behind her. Adam remained on the porch, knowing better than to follow her when her temper was up. He'd learned that much about Josephine Summers in the weeks he'd spent under her care. Inside, Josephine moved around the cabin, angrily straightening things that didn't need straightening. She knew she was being unfair. Adam hadn't chosen to bring danger to her door, and he was trying to protect her now. But the mention of the railroad and compensation had touched a nerve. The railroad had been buying up or forcing out small ranchers all along the planned route. Her father had received several offers before his death, each one accompanied by thinly veiled threats about what might happen if he refused. Josephine had continued to reject their approaches, but she knew her position was precarious. A woman alone on a struggling ranch made an easy target. When she finally calmed down, she returned to the porch. Adam hadn't moved, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains now silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting down beside him. "I shouldn't have snapped at you." "No apology needed," he replied. "I understand your feelings about the railroad. They don't always deal fairly with folks." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "That's an unexpected sentiment from someone who works for them." Adam turned to face her. "I don't work for them, not really. I take jobs as they come, and the railroad pays well, but I've seen how they operate. Not all of it sits right with me." "Then why do it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "After the war, there weren't many options for a man with my particular skills. I was a sharpshooter in the Union Army. Afterwards, I drifted west like a lot of men, taking whatever work I could find. Guarding payrolls, hunting bounties, it's what I know." "You could learn something else," Josephine suggested, "something that doesn't involve shooting people." A sad smile touched his lips. "Maybe, never really considered it before." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the sky. Josephine found herself acutely aware of Adam's presence beside her, the clean scent of soap and something distinctly male. She'd washed his clothes and mended them as best she could, but his shirt was still torn in places, revealing glimpses of tanned skin and the bandage around his torso. "I'll come with you to Copper Creek," she said finally, "but only for a day or 2. Mrs. Whitaker can look after the animals for that long." Adam looked relieved. "Thank you. We'll leave tomorrow if that works for you." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect September day for traveling. Josephine packed a small bag with essential items and rode over to the neighboring farm to ask Mrs. Whitaker to tend to her animals. The older woman agreed readily, having a soft spot for the young woman who had faced so much hardship. "Be careful in town, dear," Mrs. Whittaker warned. "There's been talk of trouble brewing between the Cattlemen's Association and those railroad fellows." "I'll be careful," Josephine promised. "It's just for a couple of days." When she returned to the cabin, Adam was outside, saddling Sundance. His movements were slower than they would normally be, but he had regained much of his strength. He wore his gun belt again, the revolver hanging low on his right hip. "Are you sure you're up for the ride?" Josephine asked, noting the thin line of his lips that suggested he was in pain. "I've ridden with worse," he said, then seeing her frown, added, "but I'll tell you if I need to stop." They set out with the sun climbing in the eastern sky. Copper Creek was about 15 miles away, a half-day's ride at a leisurely pace. Adam rode beside Josephine on the wide trail, occasionally glancing at her profile. She wore a simple riding skirt and blouse, her hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She sat her horse with the ease of someone who had spent most of her life in the saddle. "Tell me about your ranch," Adam said as they rode. "How long have you been there? My parents came out here in '62, just after they were married. My father had fought at Bull Run and decided he'd seen enough of the East. They built the cabin and started with just a few head of cattle." A fond smile touched her lips at the memory. "By the time I was 10, we had one of the most prosperous small ranches in the territory. What happened?" Her smile faded. "A hard winter in '73 took half our herd, then my mother caught influenza and passed the following spring. My father never really recovered from losing her. His heart gave out 2 years ago while we were repairing fences." She straightened in the saddle. "I've been trying to build back up since then, but it's been slow going. That's a heavy burden for anyone, let alone a young woman on her own." Josephine shrugged. "I manage. The land is good and I know cattle, it's just a matter of time. And the railroad hasn't made it any easier, I imagine." "No," she said grimly. "They want my water rights more than the land itself. There's a year-round spring on the northern section of the property valuable in these parts." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "Water rights are worth more than gold out here sometimes." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds. Around midday, they stopped by a creek to rest the horses and eat the sandwiches Josephine had packed. As they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Adam suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his gun. "What is it?" Josephine whispered, following his gaze across the creek. "Riders," he said quietly. "4 of them coming this way." Josephine squinted against the sun. 4 men on horseback were indeed approaching the creek, riding hard. As they drew closer, she could make out the dust-covered clothes and the guns strapped to their sides. "Blackwater Gang?" she asked, fear tightening her chest. Adam nodded grimly. "Looks like Denton and his boys. They must have gotten word I survived." He stood slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Josephine. "Get ready to run if I tell you to," he murmured. "Head for those rocks to the east. You can lose them in the gullies." Josephine wanted to protest, to say that she wouldn't leave him, but the words caught in her throat as the riders splashed through the creek and came to a halt about 20 yards away. "Well, well," called the lead rider, a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes. "Look who's still breathing." "You're tougher than you look, Russell." "Denton," Adam acknowledged with a slight nod. "I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know that would be a lie." Denton laughed, an unpleasant sound that made Josephine's skin crawl. "You cost me one of my best men." "Shot poor Riley right through the heart." "He was trying to kill me at the time," Adam replied evenly. "Tends to affect my manners." The outlaw's gaze shifted to Josephine, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "And who's this pretty little thing, your woman?" "She's not involved in this," Adam said, his voice hardening. "This is between you and me." "Is that right?" Denton looked amused. "Well, she's involved now, standing there next to a dead man." Josephine felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show fear. "Mr. Russell isn't dead yet," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And neither am I." One of the other men laughed. "She's got spirit, boss. Maybe we should keep her around after we finish with Russell." "Shut up, Carter," Denton snapped, then focused on Adam again. "Here's how this is going to go. You're going to tell me where you hid the money, and then I'm going to kill you quick instead of slow. The girl's fate depends on how cooperative you are." Adam's face revealed nothing. "There's a problem with your plan, Denton. I don't have the money." "Your boys took it when they left me for dead." Denton's expression darkened. "Don't play games with me. We found the saddlebags empty except for a few dollars. 10,000 in cash doesn't just disappear." "Maybe one of your own men decided to improve his share," Adam suggested. The outlaw leader's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Last chance, Russell. Where's the money?" In one fluid motion, Adam drew his revolver. The sudden movement caused Josephine to jump, but not as much as the explosion of gunfire that followed. Denton's men scrambled for their weapons, but Adam was faster despite his injury. He fired twice in rapid succession, hitting one man in the shoulder and another in the leg. "Run," Adam shouted to Josephine, firing again as Denton and the unwounded man returned fire. This time, Josephine didn't hesitate. She dashed toward the rocks Adam had indicated, heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, she heard more gunshots and the shouts of men. She reached the rocky outcropping and took cover, gasping for breath. From her position, she could see Adam backing toward the horses, trading shots with the outlaws who had taken cover behind trees and rocks. One of the wounded men lay motionless on the ground, while the other was crawling toward the creek. Denton and his remaining man were pinning Adam down with steady fire, preventing him from reaching the horses. Josephine realized with a sinking heart that he wouldn't be able to escape on foot, not with his injuries still healing. Making a split-second decision, she drew the small pistol she kept in her saddlebag and fired at the outlaws from her position. Her shot went wide, but it distracted them long enough for Adam to make a run for the horses. He reached Sundance and swung into the saddle, grimacing with pain. Josephine continued firing to cover him as he rode toward her position. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Get on," he shouted over the gunfire. She grabbed his hand and he pulled her up behind him on Sundance's back. The Palomino bolted forward under their combined weight, powerful legs eating up the distance as bullets whizzed past them. "What about my horse?" Josephine cried, clinging to Adam's waist. "No time," he called back. "Hold on tight." They rode hard for several miles, following a dry creek bed that offered some cover. When they finally slowed to give Sundance a breather, Adam turned in the saddle to look at Josephine. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. She nodded, still trying to catch her breath. "Yes, you. I've reopened my wound," he admitted, and she noticed the dark stain spreading on his shirt. "But we're alive, which is the main thing." "They'll be following us," Josephine said, glancing behind them. "Yes, but they're down 2 men and we have a head start." Adam looked around, orienting himself. "We can't go to Copper Creek now. It's the first place they'll look." "My ranch is too obvious as well," Josephine said. "Is there somewhere else we can go?" Adam thought for a moment. "There's an old line shack about 10 miles west of here. Used to belong to the Circle T Ranch before they sold out. It's isolated, might give us a place to hide while we figure this out." With no better options, Josephine agreed. They continued riding, keeping to the roughest terrain to make tracking difficult. By late afternoon, they reached the line shack, a small, weathered structure nestled in a stand of pine trees near a small spring. The inside was dusty but intact, with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Adam unsaddled Sundance and turned him out in the small corral behind the shack, while Josephine collected water from the spring. Inside, she helped Adam remove his shirt to check his wound. The gunshot injury had indeed reopened, blood seeping through the bandage. "This needs to be cleaned and rebandaged," she said, wetting a cloth with water from her canteen. Adam hissed through his teeth as she gently cleaned the wound. "Sorry," she murmured, working as carefully as possible. "I should be the one apologizing," he said, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. "I've dragged you into my mess. Those men would never have threatened you if not for me. I made my choice when I decided to help you, Josephine replied, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. And I made it again today when I fired at those outlaws. Adam caught her wrist, halting her movements. Why did you do that? You could have escaped while I was keeping them busy. Josephine met his gaze steadily. I couldn't leave you to die. Something shifted in Adam's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. His thumb moved gently over the pulse point in her wrist, and Josephine felt her heartbeat quicken in response. Thank you, he said softly. Not many would have taken that risk. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that neither had acknowledged until now. Josephine pulled her hand free gently and resumed bandaging his wound, acutely conscious of his bare chest and the way his eyes followed her movements. Night fell quickly, and with it came a chill that penetrated the thin walls of the shack. Adam managed to get the small stove working, and they shared the remaining food Josephine had packed. As they sat at the table by the light of a single lantern, Adam finally explained what had happened with the payroll money. I did hide it, he admitted. When I realized the ambush was happening, I stuffed the money into a hollow tree about a half-mile from the attack site. I was planning to come back for it after I recovered. Why didn't you tell Denton that? Josephine asked. Because he would have forced me to take him to it, then killed us both, Adam said matter-of-factly. This way, he still needs me alive to find it. But now he'll be hunting us more determinedly than ever. Adam nodded grimly. That's why we need to retrieve the money and get it to the proper authorities. It's the only way to clear your name from this mess. My name, Denton saw you with me. In his mind, that makes you an accomplice. The only way to ensure your safety is to return the money and have the law deal with Denton and his gang. Josephine considered this. So tomorrow we go for the money. Yes, and then to Fort Kierney. There's a cavalry detachment there that can help us. With their plan set, they prepared to sleep. The single cot presented an obvious problem. You take it, Adam said. I'll sleep on the floor. Don't be ridiculous, Josephine replied. You're injured, you need proper rest. I've slept on worse than a wooden floor, believe me. Josephine crossed her arms stubbornly. We'll share the cot. It's narrow but big enough for two if we're careful. Adam raised an eyebrow. That wouldn't be proper, she laughed, a short, sharp sound. I think propriety is the least of our concerns right now, Mr. Russell. Besides, it's cold and sharing body heat is practical. After a moment's hesitation, Adam agreed. They arranged themselves carefully on the cot, lying on their sides with Josephine's back to Adam's chest. Despite her practical words, Josephine found herself intensely aware of his presence, the warmth of his body, the rhythm of his breathing, the weight of his arm when he cautiously draped it over her waist. Is this all right? He murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Yes, she whispered back, her heart racing despite her exhaustion. Neither spoke again, but it was a long time before sleep claimed either of them. Morning came with a soft rain pattering on the roof. Josephine woke to find herself still enveloped in Adam's warmth, his arm holding her securely against him. For a moment, she allowed herself to enjoy the unfamiliar feeling of being held before the reality of their situation came rushing back. She carefully extricated herself without waking him and set about rekindling the fire in the stove. Outside, she checked on Sundance, who seemed well rested despite carrying double the previous day. When she returned, Adam was awake and pulling on his boots. How's it looking out there? He asked. Raining, but not too heavily. Sundance seems ready to go. They set out after a meager breakfast of jerky and the last of the bread. Adam led the way, retracing their route from the previous day until they reached a point about 5 miles from where they had encountered the Blackwater Gang. It's just over that ridge, Adam said, pointing to a rise covered with pine trees. The hollow tree is near a rock formation shaped like a bear. They approached cautiously, watching for any sign of the outlaws, but the area appeared deserted. The rain had increased, making tracking difficult, which worked in their favor. Adam found the tree easily a large ponderosa pine with a split trunk that created a natural hollow about 6 feet up. He reached inside and extracted a waterproof oilskin packet. "Is that it?" Josephine asked, keeping watch from Sundance's back. Adam opened the packet enough to verify its contents. $10,000 in banknotes, all here. Relief flooded through her. "Then let's get to Fort Kierney before Denton picks up our trail again." The fort was a hard day's ride to the south, and they pushed Sundance as much as they dared. The rain continued steadily, soaking through their clothes but obscuring their tracks. By mid-afternoon, they reached the fort, a substantial military installation with a stockade wall and several permanent buildings inside. The sentry at the gate directed them to the commander's office after hearing Adam's brief explanation about the payroll robbery. Inside the main building, they were shown to a well-appointed office where Captain William Hardin received them. "Russell," the captain said, rising from behind his desk. "I heard you were dead. Reports slightly exaggerated, sir," Adam replied with a tired smile. "And who is this?" Hardin asked, turning to Josephine. "Josephine Summers," Adam answered before she could speak. "She saved my life and has been helping me recover the stolen payroll." The captain raised his eyebrows but said nothing about the impropriety of a young woman traveling alone with a man. Instead, he indicated they should sit while Adam explained everything that had happened, from the ambush to their encounter with Denton the previous day. When Adam placed the packet of money on the desk, Hardin looked genuinely surprised. "Most men would have disappeared with this amount of cash, Russell." "I'm not most men, sir," Adam said simply. The captain nodded approvingly. "I'll send a telegram to the railroad office in Copper Creek informing them we have their payroll secure. As for the Blackwater Gang, I'll dispatch a patrol first thing in the morning." "Sir," Adam leaned forward, "Miss Summers is in danger as long as Denton is free. He saw her with me and believes she knows about the money." "I understand," Hardin replied. "You're both welcome to stay here at the fort until the situation is resolved. We have quarters for visitors." After the meeting, they were shown to separate rooms in the visitors' quarters. For the first time in days, Josephine had a proper bath and a clean set of clothes, borrowed from the commander's wife, who took an immediate liking to her. That evening, they dined with the officers in the mess hall. The atmosphere was formal but welcoming, and Josephine found herself enjoying the conversation despite her exhaustion. Adam sat beside her, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes borrowed from one of the lieutenants. The change was striking. He looked younger, more at ease in this military setting. "You fit in well here," Josephine commented as they walked back to their quarters after dinner. Adam glanced at the soldiers around them. "I spent 4 years in uniform during the war. Some habits never quite leave you. Have you ever considered going back to it? The military, I mean." He shook his head. "No, I saw enough killing during the war to last a lifetime. That's part of why I've been thinking about finding another line of work." They stopped outside Josephine's door. In the lantern light, his eyes were a deeper blue than usual, searching her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Josephine," he began, then hesitated. "I want to thank you again for everything you've done, not just for saving my life, but for standing by me through all this danger." "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "I made my choices freely." Adam took a step closer. "When this is over, when Denton is caught and you're safe, I'd like to see you again." Josephine looked up at him, surprised by the directness of his words. "I'd like that too," she admitted. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but he merely squeezed her hand gently before bidding her good night. Josephine entered her room with her heart racing, a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty swirling within her. The next morning brought news that a patrol had gone out at dawn in search of the Blackwater Gang. Captain Hardin assured them they would be informed as soon as there was any development. In the meantime, they were free to move about the fort. Adam spent most of the day conferring with the captain and the telegraph operator, sending messages to the railroad office. Josephine found herself drawn to the commander's wife, Eleanor Hardin, a kind woman who had been living on frontier posts for 15 years. "It must be difficult running a ranch alone," Eleanor commented as they sat in her garden. "It is," Josephine admitted, "but it's my home. My parents built it from nothing, and I can't bear the thought of losing it." Eleanor nodded understanding. "And this man, Adam Russell. He seems quite taken with you." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've only known each other a short time. Sometimes that's all it takes," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "William and I were engaged after 2 weeks' acquaintance. 20 years later, I've never regretted it." Later that afternoon, Josephine found Adam sitting on a bench outside the officers' quarters, staring thoughtfully at the parade ground where soldiers were drilling. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, sitting beside him. He turned to her with a smile. "I was just thinking about the future. The railroad has offered me a permanent position as a security consultant. Better pay, less danger." "That sounds promising," Josephine said carefully, aware of her conflicted feelings about the railroad. "I turned it down," Adam said, surprising her. "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because I've been thinking about what you said, about learning something new, something that doesn't involve shooting people." "Oh," Josephine tried to ignore the flutter of hope in her chest. "I've always been good with horses. I thought maybe I could try my hand at breeding and training them." "There's good money in it if you know what you're doing." Josephine couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like a fine idea. Sundance is proof enough you have an eye for good horseflesh." "It would mean settling somewhere," Adam continued, his eyes still on hers. "Buying some land, building a stable." The implication hung in the air between them. Before Josephine could respond, a sentry called out from the gate, announcing the return of the patrol. They both stood and hurried toward the entrance. Captain Hardin was already there, receiving the report from the patrol leader. His expression was grim as he turned to Adam and Josephine. "They found 2 of them," he said without preamble. "The men you wounded, both dead, apparently finished off by their own companions." "And Denton?" Adam asked tensely. "No sign of him or the other man." "But they found evidence of a camp about 10 miles northeast of here. They've been tracking you." Josephine felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "So they could still be out there waiting." "It's likely," Hardin agreed. "I've doubled the sentries and will keep patrols going, but until they're caught, I must advise against leaving the fort." That evening, a tension settled over the fort. The knowledge that dangerous men might be lurking nearby put everyone on edge. After a quiet dinner, Adam walked Josephine back to her quarters again. "I don't like this waiting," he said as they paused outside her door. "Denton isn't the type to give up easily." "What choice do we have?" Josephine asked. "We can't exactly go hunting for them ourselves." Adam ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "I know, but I hate that you're in danger because of me." Josephine reached out impulsively, taking his hand in hers. "I'm not sorry I helped you, Adam, not for a moment." The touch of her hand seemed to break something loose in him. With a swift movement, he drew her close, one arm wrapping around her waist while his other hand cupped her face. His lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with a hunger that took her breath away. Josephine responded without hesitation, her arms sliding around his neck as she pressed closer. All the tension and fear of the past days seemed to crystallize into this one moment of connection, this affirmation that they were alive and together. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily. Adam rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I've wanted to do that since I woke up and saw you standing over me with that rifle," he murmured. Josephine laughed softly. "Even when I was threatening to shoot you." "Especially then." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, all fire and determination." She kissed him again, briefly but with feeling. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day of waiting." But as it turned out, they didn't have to wait long at all. Shortly after midnight, gunshots rang out near the eastern gate of the fort. Josephine woke instantly, reaching for her clothes. By the time she was dressed, there was a rapid knock at her door. It was one of the soldiers, his young face tense. "Miss Summers, Captain Hardin requests that you come to the command building immediately. The fort is under attack." Josephine followed him through the darkened compound, staying close to the buildings to avoid being seen from the walls. Inside the command building, she found Adam and Captain Hardin bent over a map. "Josephine," Adam said, relief evident in his voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "What's happening?" Hardin pointed to the map. "It appears Denton has gathered reinforcements. We've counted at least 8 riders. They're staying out of rifle range but have been taking shots at the sentries." 8, Adam frowned. "That's more than just Denton and the one man who escaped with him." "Local troublemakers, most likely," Hardin said grimly. "The Blackwater Gang has connections throughout the territory." "What do they want?" Josephine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Me," Adam said flatly. "And the money. They sent a messenger under a white flag demanding both, or they'll attack the fort at dawn." Hardin straightened up. "Which, of course, we refused. This fort has withstood attacks from war parties 3 times that size. We can hold out indefinitely." "But civilians could be hurt in the crossfire," Adam pointed out. "And once they realize they can't take the fort, they might decide to go after Josephine's ranch instead." The thought hadn't occurred to Josephine, and her blood ran cold at the idea of her home being burned or her animals slaughtered in revenge. "I won't let that happen," Adam said, seeing the fear in her eyes. "I have a plan, but it's dangerous." "I'm listening," Hardin said, crossing his arms. Adam outlined his idea he would leave the fort under cover of darkness, drawing Denton and his men away. Once they were focused on pursuing him, the cavalry could outflank them and capture or kill the outlaws. "It's too risky," Josephine protested. "You're still not fully recovered from your wounds." "It's the best chance we have of ending this without a prolonged siege or innocent people getting hurt," Adam argued. Hardin considered the plan. "It could work if we coordinate properly, but Russell's right, it's extremely dangerous for the person acting as bait." "Then I'm coming too," Josephine said firmly. Adam shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. The whole point is to keep you safe. 2 riders will draw more attention than 1, she pointed out. "And I know this territory better than you do. If something goes wrong, I can guide us to safety." The argument continued for several minutes, but in the end, Josephine's determination won out. They would both leave through a small postern gate on the western side of the fort, while the main force of outlaws was focused on the eastern approach. They prepared quickly, gathering supplies and weapons. Sundance was brought from the stables, along with a fresh mount for Josephine, a steady bay gelding from the cavalry stock. Captain Hardin assigned 2 of his best scouts to follow at a distance, keeping an eye on them while the main force of cavalry prepared to move out. Just before 3 in the morning, with the moon providing just enough light to see by, they slipped through the small gate and into the darkness beyond. They rode west initially, keeping to the shadows, then gradually circled around to the north where the land became more rugged. "If they take the bait, they'll follow us up through Devil's Canyon," Adam said quietly as they paused on a ridge to look back. "The cavalry can cut them off at the northern end." "And if they don't take the bait?" Josephine asked. Adam's expression was grim in the moonlight. "Then we keep riding until we reach the territorial marshal's office in Clearwater. It's 3 days' hard ride, but we might make it." They continued on, alert for any sign of pursuit. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. "They've spotted us," Adam said, urging Sundance to a faster pace. "Now we just need to lead them into the trap." They rode hard for Devil's Canyon, a narrow passage between steep rock walls that ran for nearly 2 miles before opening into a wider valley. The plan was to lead Denton and his men deep into the canyon, where they would be caught between Adam and Josephine at one end and the cavalry at the other. The outlaws gained ground steadily, their fresher horses closing the distance. By the time Adam and Josephine reached the mouth of the canyon, they could see dust rising less than a half-mile behind them. "We need to hurry," Josephine called over the thunder of hooves. "They're getting too close." They plunged into the canyon, the walls rising sharply on either side. The narrow trail forced them to ride single file, Adam leading the way with Josephine close behind. They had gone perhaps a mile when a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rocks near Adam's head. "They're in range," he shouted, drawing his revolver. They urged their horses faster, racing toward the northern end of the canyon where the cavalry should be waiting. Another shot came closer, and Josephine felt something tug at her sleeve, a bullet passing through the fabric without touching her skin. The canyon began to widen, indicating they were nearing the exit. Adam turned in the saddle, firing 2 shots to slow their pursuers. Josephine looked ahead eagerly, expecting to see the blue uniforms of the cavalry, but the path ahead was empty. "Where are they?" she cried, panic rising in her throat. Adam's face was tense. "Something must have delayed them. We need to find cover." He pointed to a cluster of boulders to their right, and they veered toward it, dismounting quickly and pulling their horses in among the rocks. Adam positioned himself at the edge, revolver ready. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice tight with concentration. The outlaws had slowed, aware that their quarry had taken cover. Denton's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Russell, we know you're there. Come out with the money and maybe we'll let the girl live." "Don't believe him," Josephine whispered, gripping her own pistol tightly. Adam nodded grimly. "I don't, but we need to buy time for the cavalry to arrive." He called back to Denton, "Let Josephine go and we can talk about the money." A harsh laugh was the response. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Russell. We've got you cornered." The standoff continued, with occasional shots exchanged whenever one of the outlaws tried to advance closer to their position. Josephine and Adam each had limited ammunition, and they used it sparingly, making each shot count. As the sun climbed higher, the heat in the canyon became oppressive. Josephine's mouth was dry, her hands slick with sweat as she gripped her pistol. Adam looked pale, and she noticed a fresh stain of blood on his shirt where his wound had reopened. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He glanced down dismissively. "It's nothing. Save your worry for getting out of here alive." Just when it seemed their situation couldn't get more desperate, the distant sound of a bugle echoed through the canyon. The cavalry had finally arrived. Denton and his men realized it too. There was a flurry of activity as they abandoned their positions and scrambled for their horses. "They're trying to escape through the south end," Adam exclaimed, but it was too late for the outlaws. From both directions came the thunder of hooves as cavalry troops converged on the canyon. Caught in the middle, Denton's gang had nowhere to run. "Surrender," came Captain Hardin's authoritative voice. "Throw down your weapons." For a moment, it seemed the outlaws might fight, but faced with overwhelming force, most of them chose to surrender. Only Denton himself made a last desperate stand, firing wildly at the soldiers until a volley of return fire cut him down. The battle was over in minutes. When Adam and Josephine emerged from their hiding place, they found Captain Hardin directing his men as they rounded up the surviving outlaws. "You're late," Adam said, but there was no accusation in his tone, only relief. Hardin nodded apologetically. "One of Denton's men was watching the fort. We had to deal with him before we could move out, or he would have warned the others." He looked them over with concern. "Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Josephine assured him, though she kept a supportive hand on Adam's arm, worried about his reopened wound. They returned to the fort, where a doctor examined Adam and pronounced that no serious damage had been done. The wound was cleaned and rebandaged, and he was ordered to rest. "Which I fully intend to do," he told Josephine as they sat in the fort's garden later that day. "I think I've had enough excitement for a while." She smiled, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to ease. "So what happens now? Will you go back to the railroad to report?" Adam shook his head. "No need. Captain Hardin has handled all the official reports. The money's been sent on to its destination with a proper escort this time." He hesitated, then took her hand. "I was thinking I might head back toward Copper Creek. There's a piece of land I've had my eye on, not far from a certain ranch with a year-round spring." Josephine's heart skipped a beat. "Is that so?" "It is," he confirmed, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Of course, I'd need to ask the neighboring rancher if she'd mind having me as a neighbor. I hear she's quite particular." "I think she might be amenable to the idea," Josephine replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the joy bubbling up inside her. "Especially if this neighbor knows anything about breeding horses." Adam's smile deepened. "As it happens, he does, and he's looking for a partner who knows cattle to maybe combine their operations someday." "That sounds like a solid business proposition," Josephine said, unable to stop her own smile from spreading. "But what about the railroad? Won't they come after her water rights?" "Not if they believe the water is already spoken for by one of their former employees," Adam said with a wink. "I may have mentioned to Captain Hardin that I'm considering settling in the area and would appreciate his support in securing certain properties against corporate interests." Josephine laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Adam Russell, you are a devious man." "Only when it comes to protecting what I care about," he said, suddenly serious. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "And I care about you, Josephine Summers, more than I thought possible after such a short time." "I care about you too," she whispered, her heart full. They were married 3 months later in the small church in Copper Creek, with Captain and Mrs. Hardin in attendance along with neighbors from surrounding ranches. Adam had purchased the land he'd mentioned, a modest property bordering Josephine's ranch to the west. True to his word, he began breeding and training horses, starting with Sundance as his foundation stallion. Josephine's cattle operation improved with Adam's help, and within 2 years, their combined ranch, which they named Sundance Springs, was one of the most prosperous in the territory. They built a new house halfway between the original cabin and Adam's property, a comfortable home with a wide porch where they often sat in the evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains. It was on that porch, a year after their wedding, that Josephine told Adam she was expecting their first child. "A son or daughter to inherit all this," Adam said, his arm around her shoulders as they looked out over their land. "Your parents would be proud of what you've built here." "What we've built," she corrected him, leaning into his embrace. "I couldn't have done it without you." "I think you would have managed just fine," he said with a smile. "You were doing pretty well on your own when I showed up half dead on your doorstep." Josephine laughed at the memory. "You were too weak to stand. I had to feed you soup until your hands stopped shaking." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Adam murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Being shot by outlaws and left for dead. Only you would see it that way," she teased. But as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Josephine silently agreed with him. That fateful day when a wounded cowboy had fallen from his horse on her property had changed everything. What had started with soup and shaking hands had grown into a love that would sustain them through all the challenges of building a life together in the Wild West. And as their child grew within her, Josephine knew that the story of the cowboy and the woman who saved him would be told for generations to come, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest strength is shown in moments of greatest weakness, and the deepest love can begin with the simplest act of kindness.